Welcome everybody. I'm your host, Liberty Man Van, and today is October 29th, 2017. And as you know, we're going to, as usual, talk about the news and put it in a libertarian perspective. And we believe in liberty, we believe in freedom of association, free markets, and the non-aggression principle, which means simply you can't hit people and you can't take their stuff. So let's get to the first story. It's about the hurricanes this year, and it seems like we've had quite a few of them. It's been a really active hurricane season this year in 2017. It seems that about every 10 years or so we'll have a really active season, and then in between there won't be much of anything. We'll have one here and there. But no matter how many seasons we seem to have in between where there's hardly any hurricanes, as sure as they hit, they're sure to be attributed by some to climate change, which used to be known as global warming. However, the last several years have seen a little bit of cooling of temperatures, and so they had to rename it from global warming to climate change. That's sure to cover just about everything, isn't it? And this season with the hurricanes, the most destructive one hit the Gulf Coast, and it hit Texas hard, the Houston and surrounding areas. And it just, it sat there for a while and just didn't go very far and just dumped water, and we had massive flooding because of it. So here's a little bit of the news coverage from that storm.
Lester, good evening. This neighborhood where rescues are happening nonstop flooded more than 10 feet in areas in mere hours. An example of the disaster and its fury.
It is a colossal rescue effort. Thousands stranded, taken by boat and helicopter.
Water's so high, the boats are going over the top of the cars.
Saved using anything that floats. Their faces tell the story of anguish, anxiety, and fear.
The water was up to here. I walked out and I was just like screaming. I seen somebody, they tried to put us on air mattresses. It didn't work. They had to put the babies on air mattresses. People were carrying babies on their shoulders.
With emergency responders overwhelmed, Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner is asking people to call 911 only if their life is in danger, as he defended his decision not to issue a mandatory evacuation order.
There have been scores of rescues overnight and into the morning in Houston. That is where we find Mark Strassman. Mark?
Good morning, Christine. I'm standing in one example of the flash flooding that is all over the city of Houston. You can think of this city as a series of islands, areas completely surrounded by water. That's there's an on-ramp to I-10 behind me, and it's the same story in Houston all over the place. You can't get there from here. Everything is completely impassable.
The floodwaters vanished as fast as they'd come. In the heart of America's fourth largest city, they're just beginning to contemplate the aftermath of an unprecedented storm.
Well, this sand here tells you that the water was flowing right over this busy intersection here in downtown Houston. And if you look over the edge of this bridge, you can see just how fast the water's fallen.
And whenever you have a natural disaster hit an area, the price gougers are soon to follow.
Price gouging after Harvey. Harvey has managed to bring out the best and the worst in people. This story focuses on the latter. Texas officials have received hundreds of complaints of price gouging and scams in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. The Texas Attorney General's office said it received 684 complaints. It's currently investigating 9 cases, but expects that number to increase. In one instance, a convenience store reportedly was asking $20 a gallon for gas, $8.50 for a bottle of water, and $99 for a case of water.
So what is the libertarian view on this price gouging? Well, an emotional response would say, yeah, throw those bums in jail for ripping people off, right? They're trying to take, these people are in need. They've been hit by a disaster and you're going to come in here and gouge them? That's the emotional response. But what we should do is a little more nuanced than that. And I'm going to read you from an article here. We'll read a few sections from an article which was posted at fee.org. That's Foundation for Economic Education.org. And the article was entitled, Anti-Price Gouging Laws Make About as Much Sense as Anti-High Temperature Laws. And the first part of the article goes into the typical defense of anti-price gouging laws. Quote, many residents in Texas and Louisiana have suffered from the devastating effects of Hurricane Harvey in recent days, and some of those residents are now being unfairly subjected to further suffering from the unconscionable actions of businesses and individuals who are engaged in illegal price gouging for essential goods like gasoline, water, and food. To prevent residents from being victimized by ruthless and greedy price gougers, Texas law comes to the rescue. Texas law prohibits businesses from charging exorbitant prices for gasoline, food, water, clothing, and lodging following natural disasters like Hurricane Harvey. Despite those price gouging laws, one large Texas retailer was allegedly charging $42 for a case of water, and a gas station in the affected area was reported to be charging $99 for a case of water, according to the Texas Attorney General. Those retailers are now subject to legal prosecution and fines for charging excessively high prices in violation of price gouging laws in Texas. So, let's just go through this article and look at some of the language here. So what I'm seeing here is this phrase, exorbitant prices. So who determines what the exorbitant price is, and how should that price be determined? Is it $10 for a case of water? $15? $20? How do you arrive at that price that we would call and prosecute under this price gouging law? All right? That's a good question. And another phrase we see in here, excessively high prices. Again, who has determined what excessively high is? Now, the libertarian way to view this question is that the government should butt out. They should let people make decisions. If a store is charging $40 for a case of water, and you have a person willing to pay $40 and a business willing to sell it for $40, where's the crime? Who's being coerced here? Nobody's making that person buy the case of water. So let's say there was a law that you could only charge, I don't know, $10 for a case of water. Okay, what do you think would happen then? What do you think if legally you could only sell a case of water for $10? And people really needed it and were willing to pay more than that for it? Well, you would create a black market, wouldn't you? People would go into the stores, and some people would go into the stores and buy up all they could for $10 and then go out on the street and sell it for $20 or $30 or whatever they could get for it. Remember the prohibition? We tried to prevent people from drinking alcohol. It just created a black market. Now, the other aspect of this, well, let's just read a little bit more from the fee article, and then we'll talk about it a little more. I'll give you some recollection from my own experience about how these things work. Continuing with the article, the artificially low government mandated prices will cause distortions and inefficiencies in Texas and Louisiana because the artificial prices won't accurately and truthfully reflect the economic reality that supplies of critical goods are extremely low at the same time demand for those goods is extremely high. Remember the law of supply and demand? Price gouging laws create a government-mandated fantasy world with prices that create a complete disconnect between the true measure of a scarce goods value and a fantasy value of that goods value. A fantasy measure of that goods value. When it comes to maximizing the efficient allocation of resources following a natural disaster like Hurricane Harvey, what we want are accurate, truthful, and precise measures of market conditions. And we can only get these measures from market prices, not from artificial, government-mandated price gouging laws. And it may seem unfair, okay, it may seem mean and cruel for somebody to charge that much for water or gasoline or maybe lumber or whatever people need there. But you see what the higher prices do is they encourage people to bring those resources into the area. Hey, water over here is going for $40 a case. Let's bring some more water in, you see. And so that causes more resources to be brought into the area. And if those people get in there and they say, wow, it was selling for $40, let's try to sell it for $100 a case of water. At some point, the market's going to say, nah, we're not paying that much. Sorry, Charlie. You see, and this supply and demand would reach an equilibrium. And that's the most, that you want people to be encouraged to get these resources to these areas as soon as possible. And price is the essential piece of information that tells people how much these goods are in need, right? Okay. Now, let me give you a personal example that I can remember. I'm showing my age now, but I'm old enough to remember when during the early 70s there was an Arab oil embargo. All right? And this was in response to the Yom Kippur War. War between Arabs and the Israelis, and so after the war, the Arabs were going to punish anyone that they thought might be supporting Israel. And that included Canada, the United States, and some other countries. So they jacked up the price of oil some, okay? And what happened was instead of the government, this was President Nixon at the time, instead of letting prices find a natural level where people were willing to pay it, he put artificial limits on the price of gasoline and what you could charge for it. The result? Long lines. I can remember watching television on the nightly news and showing all these very long lines of cars, you know, trying to get in to buy gas. Because, hey, if you can't let entrepreneurs profit and find the level where supply and demand meet, if you artificially keep the price of the product down, then there's less incentive for the distributors to bring more gas to the gas stations to alleviate the shortage. And so basically it just prolonged the shortage. And it may sound cold for the price for the government to let the price of gas go up, or, during an Arab oil embargo, or to let the price of lumber or water go up after a hurricane hits, but it makes for the most efficient allocation of resources, and it gets the resources where they are most needed, and that is the most efficient and the most humane way to do it. The next myth that we're going to explode using this natural disaster called Hurricane Harvey is called the broken window fallacy. And you will see this fallacy surface whenever there's a natural disaster. But the broken window fallacy is named, it was originated from a guy named Frederick Bastiat, who was a French economist of the 19th century. And the argument goes something like this. There's a shopkeeper, and he has a son, and his son's a little cantankerous and gets just a little bit, careless one day and breaks a window in his shop. Next, what happens? We can't have a broken window in the shop. It might let some rain in. It might allow somebody to enter after hours and steal some stuff. So we better get it repaired as soon as possible. So he calls the glazier. The glazier comes over and repairs the window for him and charges him 6 francs. And the argument goes that, hey, this is going to stimulate the economy because we put the glazier to work, right? Wrong. That's what is seen. What is seen is the 6 francs in the glazier's pocket. What is not seen is that now the shopkeeper is out of 6 francs. He's got the same window. It's a different window actually, but let's say it's a comparable window. He hasn't gained anything. He doesn't have a better window now. He's just replaced it. So he's just out of $6. And the other thing that you don't see is that the shopkeeper was going to take 6 francs and go to the cobbler and get a new pair of shoes. So what is not seen is that the cobbler is now out of $6 that he would have had otherwise. So the guy who repaired the window has plus $6, but the shopkeeper has minus $6. Well, francs rather. We're talking francs here. And the cobbler is out of 6 francs. So you take plus 6 and subtract 6 and subtract 6 more, and the net is minus 6. So this is a net loss. And that makes common sense when you think about it. Whenever you have to replace something that was already there, you're not gaining anything. That's the broken window fallacy, this idea that destruction by a natural disaster or by anything is going to create wealth. So I'm going to read next from a Mises.org article entitled "The Broken Window Fallacy is Alive and Well." Quote, as Hurricane Harvey, now Tropical Storm Harvey, makes its way across the southern U.S., estimates have already come in as to the cost of the storm. According to AccuWeather, Harvey is expected to cost upwards of $190 billion in damages, 1% of the national GDP. This makes Harvey the costliest storm ever to hit the United States, more than Katrina at $100 billion and Sandy at $60 billion combined. And the next section of the article is entitled, "Here Come the Clowns." As in the wake of every disaster, pundits and politically biased economists, including Larry Summers, who declared Japan's 2011 tsunami would boost economic growth, will wax elegantly on how Harvey will end up being a boon for the economy. CNBC, for example, reports that Hurricane Harvey may ultimately raise wages. It will spawn government spending and insurance payouts to flood victims, we're told. These victims will spend that money in the economy, which will put people back to work, employ the factors of production, and so on and so on. Okay. So the window is broken, and now the glazier is going to stimulate his economy, right? Continuing, you have heard similar logic from historians. Actually, let's back up here. And I just want to, this is not part of the article now, just wanted to make some of my own comments about this. This broken window fallacy seems to surface every time there's a natural disaster, like it's going to stimulate the economy. And common sense tells you if you have to spend money to replace something you already have, that's not a net benefit to the economy. We heard this same type of argument regarding World War II, and you've probably heard this. Hey, it's the World War II stimulated the economy and got us out of the Depression, right? That was an economic boon, the war, World War II. It's the same kind of fallacious thinking. When you have to spend money on bombs and tanks and warships instead of, I don't know, cars or televisions or whatever you're spending them on. And if you go, you see what happened is these, the GDP also includes government spending. So when the government spent out the wazoo for munitions and tanks and aircraft carriers and whatever, and boots, whatever they needed for the war, for World War II, that spending was included in the GDP. So it made the numbers look better, but every penny spent by the government is taken out of somebody else's pocket. It's taken out of the taxpayer's pocket. So if you go look at the debt from, say, 1900 to 1950, you'll see a big blip, the debt going up during the World War II years. So that tells you how they stimulated the economy. They just borrowed money. And borrowing money, as we know, is just a tax on future generations. So anytime you see one of these natural disasters and somebody try to convince you that it's going to cause an economic boon, it's going to be good for the economy, just say, bunk. And now for our final angle concerning this year's hurricanes. I've been watching this for a number of years now, these natural disasters and particularly these floods, flood-prone areas, and it seems like the same areas get hit over and over again. And what happens? We rebuild in the same flood-prone areas again and again. Do we not learn from our mistakes? How can this happen time and again? What makes this possible to keep making the same mistakes over and over again? Do we not learn from our mistakes regarding these floods? How can it happen? And the short answer is the reason it can happen is because they're paying for this with other people's money. There's what's called a National Flood Insurance Program, and it artificially drives down the cost of flood insurance so that people in those areas can buy insurance much cheaper than the market rate. And so the rest of us are subsidizing this foolishness of rebuilding again and again in the same area. So our next article comes from USA Today, and it's entitled, "Dear Texas, how many times do we have to rebuild the same house?" From the article, Hurricane Harvey offers the clearest lesson why Congress should not perpetuate the federal National Flood Insurance Program, which expires at the end of September. The ravages in Houston and elsewhere would be far less if the federal government had not offered massively subsidized flood insurance in high-risk, environmentally perilous locales. But this is the same folly the feds have perpetuated for almost 50 years. NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, embraced a flood, rebuild, repeat model that has spawned an almost $25 billion debt. That's right, this program is not actuarially sound. The National Wildlife Federation estimated in 1998 that 2% of properties covered by federal flood insurance had multiple damage claims, accounting for 40% of flood insurance outlays. 2% of properties accounting for 40% of damages. And that more than 5,000 homes had repeat claims exceeding their property value. A recent Pew Charitable Trust study revealed that 1% of the 5 million properties insured have produced almost a third of the damage claims and half the debt. NFIP paid to rebuild one Houston home 16 times in 18 years, spending almost $1 million to perpetually restore a house worth less than $120,000. Again, how can this happen again and again and again? Because the people who keep rebuilding over in those areas are not paying for it. If they were paying for it, if we had honest pricing of flood insurance, then people would sort it out. They would decide, oh, my insurance is going way up this time. I don't think I'll rebuild there. Now, you may have some really wealthy person say, yeah, I'll rebuild there. I can afford the insurance. But real prices, if we let a real market work there, the prices would cut down on a lot of this foolishness. But let's continue. The Washington Post recently reported that a house outside Baton Rouge, valued at $55,921, has flooded 40 times over the years, amassing $428,000 in claims. A $90,000 property near the Mississippi River north of St. Louis has flooded 34 times, racking up claims of more than $608,000. Just keeps going with your money. FEMA has loitered on updating in part because many members of Congress vehemently oppose accurate estimates of the risks and updated higher insurance rates for their constituents. The financial soundness of federal flood insurance will always depend on politicians' self-restraint in buying votes. In other words, the program is actuarially doomed. There is no constitutional right to federal bailouts for flooded homes. The sooner the feds exit the flood insurance business, the safer American coasts and paychecks will be. In other words, who's in favor of continuing these programs? Well, gosh, if you're in Florida, you have a lot of hurricanes, or you're maybe in Mississippi or one of the places that gets hit a lot by these storms, you're going to be in favor of these programs. So just like every other government program, and we've talked about this before. Who benefits? The politicians. This goes back to my entity theory about how people... My entity theory says that any entity is going to act in its own best interests. If you're an individual, you're going to act in your own best interests. Okay? Even if you're a father and you see two of your kids about to get run over by a car, and you step in front of the car and push your kids out of the way and you get run over and take the fall, you're still acting in your own best interest. It's your family, right? How about another entity would be a corporate entity. Okay, businesses are going to act in their own self-interest. I'm not naive about that. I believe in free markets. I believe in free enterprise, but I also understand that businesses are going to act in their own self-interest, and their self-interest is going to be serving the people, their clients, okay, the people that come into their business. The better they serve those people, the better off they're going to do. And if they stray from that, they may get away from it for a while. If you're a restaurant and you're serving stew and you've built up a reputation over the years for having the best beef stew around, but then one day, in order to increase profits, you start watering down the stew just a little bit. All right, and then maybe a year or two later, you water it down a little bit more. Okay, your reputation might pull you for a while, but at some point, the people are going to understand that you've been watering the stew down and that you're charging the same amount for it, and they're getting less value, and they're more likely to take their business elsewhere. Okay, so it's the consumers that keep businesses' feet to the fire. Who keeps government's feet to the fire? And businesses, by the way, in order to maintain your business, they can't force you to do business with them. But how about other entities? How about your local public school? Does the public school have to serve you? No. Bottom line is they're going to get funded whether you like them or not. You don't have a right to just walk away and say, you know, I'm not going to do business with my public school. I mean, you have the right to do that, but you're going to pay double. You're going to pay once with your taxes to support the public school, and if you put your kids in a private school, you're going to pay twice. So you can go complain all you want to the school board. That doesn't mean they're going to change a thing. What if there was a restaurant board and you had to go to the same restaurant? And this is government again. You know, public schools are funded with public funds. That means they take it out of your pocket and put it in a fund. They don't ask you about it. If you don't pay your property taxes, they'll come put you in jail, or they'll take away your property. So this is coerced business. Any kind of government business is coerced. You don't have any choice. So how are you going to hold their feet to the fire? All right. And like in this flood insurance program. But back to my entity theory. That's where I was going with this. So what I'm saying is all entities, all right, the American Medical Association, that's an entity. They're going to do what's in the best interests of the American Medical Association, which for the most part is protecting the backs of physicians, right? The American Education Association is they're not looking out primarily for the best interests of students and parents. And I seem to be picking on education here, but there's a whole lot of areas when you can apply this same entity theory. But the AEA, they're going to be primarily looking out for what they perceive the interests of their own organization to be, and for the teachers. Same thing with government, a government agency. What do all these government agencies do year after year when the budget comes up for renewal? Do they go in front of Congress and say, you know, we need less money than we did last year? No, it doesn't happen. Because entities always are going to do what's in their best interest, and that's to grab more money if you're a government entity. A politician is always going to do what is in his or her best interest, and that's trying to get reelected. So if you're in Florida and you're a senator, you don't want this flood insurance program to end because there's a whole lot of hurricanes hit that area and it causes a lot of flooding. You're going to buy votes. You're not going to do what's best for the taxpayers as a whole. You're going to do what's best for you, the politician. That's why I say, folks, the government is not looking out for you. You have to shed this idea of a benevolent government that's looking out for your best interest. They're not. They're looking out for their interests. Now, I've bashed politicians here, but you know who keeps going out and re-electing these people? You do. Voters do. So you're also to blame. If you don't start electing or looking for liberty-minded candidates that hold liberty as their primary value, okay? If you don't elect people who hold liberty as the primary value, then you can look in the mirror. You are partly to blame. Our next story is about big shot Hollywood film producer Harvey Weinstein. As you may have heard, he is recently being accused of being a sexual predator over decades of work in the film industry. This from a USA Today article. Since the New York Times and New Yorker published bombshell reports detailing decades of alleged sexual harassment and assault by producer Harvey Weinstein early this month, dozens of women have come forward with similar claims against the movie mogul. So far, 60 women have accused Weinstein of inappropriate to potentially criminal behavior, ranging from requests for messages to intimidating sexual advances to rape. Now, those of us who are enlightened by rock and roll are not surprised by this. As a matter of fact, the Eagles told us about this decades ago. Well, there you have it. Those of us who are enlightened by rock and roll, we've known about this for years. This is old news. And now the time has come in our program for a little libertarian humor. Hey, have you ever wondered what the libertarian version of Star Wars would look like?
Are you a member of the Galactic Empire?
Am I being detained? Because I know my rights.
My partner there is telling me that his womp rat has signaled on your vehicle.
That is bullshit. Your partner just tapped my speeder and the womp rat smelled his fingers.
I'm going to need to see your identification.
You don't need to see my identification. I rise to speak speak until I can speak no more about this government's unauthorized use of droid strikes.
You can't be the guy who builds this. You can't be the corporation that builds this. You have to be an empire to build something like this. It takes government leadership to build a battle station the size of a moon that can obliterate inhabited planets.
And it doesn't matter if it's bulk metadata or not. Who you're sending holograms to is information about you and your personal life.
Where are those transmissions you intercepted?
Well, in my defense, I'm not handling anything anymore. That's been passed to the journalists.
You are part of a rebel alliance and a traitor.
There are 14 individuals frozen in carbonite 20 years later, and they've never had a trial.
Immense eminent domain.
Let's at least audit the Imperial Reserve.
I'm just saying it's a slippery slope from gay marriage to incest. I swear to you, I just saw a woman kissing her own brother.
I have apologized for saying sand people in my older newsletters. That was a different time. I want you to know that today I have many indigenous Tuscan peoples on my staff and as my friends.
10,000, all in advance.
10,000? We don't buy our own ship for that. The government has increased the cost of risk, and so our supplier is increasing the cost of his services. It's basic economics, Luke. We're going to do a little bit of lightsaber work, and then I'm going to have you read a lot of Milton Friedman. The Imperial Environmental Protection Agency has 60,000 stormtroopers. Why do they need Imperial walkers to protect forestation on Endor?